Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us right now. We got a special podcast series that we're kicking off for a little while here called Random Reflections Podcast.
Random Reflections with Rick, with Rick Rubel.
We need a few more R's in
That's
there.
right.
Just call it, we're going to call it like pirates or something.
R. Alliteration.
Yeah, Rick, why are we having a Random Reflections podcast?
So here's the deal. As about a year ago when we were talking about my retirement, and we were talking about what my last few months might look like with the elders, we were just kind of spitballing ideas. And I think one of the guys, I can't even remember where it came from, but it was like, oh, it might be kind of cool to just give you a chance to talk about stuff that you want to make sure that you talk about before you finish. And so that kind of morphed into a conversation about a podcast. We had talked about maybe starting that in January. And since it's March, it's probably time to do that if we're going to do that. So basically, for, I don't know, the next 6 or 8 weeks, I'm going to try and do a podcast that drops on Thursdays that just gives me a chance to talk about whatever I want to talk about, which is why it's Random Reflections.
Yeah, it's your call what the subject matter is.
Yeah.
I like it. We could have gotten a nice rocking chair, a little whittling in a fireplace or something like that,
Actually, that was kind of the idea for the set, to have me have a nice cardigan sweater, sit at the fireplace, and
but you need a
tell
spittoon.
stories.
I feel like you need a spittoon for something like that.
That's ugly. That's just ugly. Ugly. I could have it. It could be it could be like my Ohio State mug.
Yeah, right.
But it's there. So if you're watching and want to donate a spittoon to the set,
there you go.
We probably won't use it, but you can do it. We might put it out there. Who knows?
So talking random reflections, things like that. Where do you want to start? What is the random reflection number one?
Random reflection number one. I actually was thinking, you come to a place that you're kind of into the home stretch. I had a conversation with somebody the other day and said, it's really weird to think that I'm in the last 3% of my ministry at Northpointe in terms of time. So what do you talk about in that? And there's all kinds of stuff that I'd love to talk about. I'd love to talk about, I think, lessons I've learned in parenting and the kind of the way I approach premarital counseling, stuff, lots of things that will just be fun to talk about. But I thought it might make sense to start with just talking about navigating crisis. So if we put a title on this, it would be Navigating Crisis. And kind of where that came from is I think back to when we first came to Northpointe in 2014 and what was going on at that point in time.
Yeah, you came during a crisis.
Not in some ways.
It's pretty big ways.
Yeah. So, for a large percentage of Northpointe now, that's all ancient history.
For sure.
People weren't around and experienced that. The church was significant, but I think there's probably been about 75% turnover.
Yeah.
I think there's probably 25% of who we are now was around 10 or 12 years ago.
It's not necessarily an uncommon thing when you think that you've been here for a decade.
Right. Yeah. And especially with how much turnover there is in our culture now.
Yeah.
In terms of patterns of people, that kind of thing, and COVID. COVID accelerated that a ton. So if you weren't around, basically what happened in 2012, 2013, here at Northpointe, there were some staff issues that were pretty significant. There was a moral failure that happened with somebody who was on staff in a kind of a part-time way, but it had significant impact. There was some things that happened internally with the staff that ultimately the really short version is probably a year before I came, there were 9 people on staff. By the time I got here, there were 2 people on staff in pastoral roles, and then 3 admin, 2.5 admin kind of roles that were there. So it looked very different.
Yeah.
And part of this is my perspective. People who've been around long might have a little bit different perspective, but my perspective was there were people that were in different camps in terms of their perspective on what had happened.
Sure.
With the loss of all the staff, loss of the lead pastor, loss of teaching pastor, loss of music pastor, loss of a family life pastor, all that stuff. There were people who had different perspectives and lots of just pain, lots of hurt in the process. And so when I think back on that and think about kind of where we are now, the level of trust that there is in the leadership, in the eldership, in the staff is just incredibly, that's a blessing from God. Yeah. And that's, I think, the result of lots of stuff that's happened over the last 10 years. But one of the things that we did when we came, it's funny when I interviewed here on the way back to Ohio, to Dayton, where we were at that point in time. I said to Deb, I think if we come to Northpointe, I think one of the things that we need to do is just invite people to come to our house for like dessert or something. Yeah. And Deb said, I've been thinking about the same thing. As I was praying, I thought, if we come, she actually, I think, said, when we come, we need to have like desserts at our house or whatever. Yeah. And so we actually did that. I started in July and that fall, in September, October, November, we had about 200 people in our home for dessert. Mm-hmm. During those weeks, sometimes one, sometimes two a week. And it was really, really helpful for me to just get to know people.
Well, if you want people in the church to like you, it really is Deb's Desserts. It's a very good way to do it. Between that mint ice cream thing and funeral cake over here, everybody in the church just became big friends with the Rubles.
And there were a lot of... there was some apple pies and a lot of apple crisps.
What you're telling me is you lost weight that fall.
We did not do well. It's funny because I look back at pictures from 10 years ago and think I was a lot thinner back then when we started. Anyway, the whole random reflections thing is okay. How do you navigate crisis? What do you do in crisis? And as I've talked to people about what those first few years were for us at Northpointe, it really was all about just loving people because people were so deeply hurt and wounded, didn't understand. And typically what happens when a new pastor comes in is that there's this sense of, okay, what's your vision? Where do you want the church to go? What are we going to do? And there was no room for that because of the pain that existed at that point in time. And people just really needed to be loved and needed to have some sense of assurance that trust could be reestablished again. And that just came from being with people, spending time, that kind of thing. So when, in terms of thinking about the random reflections thing, if you're at a place where someone that you know or love or at work or whatever is in the midst of crisis, and that crisis could be the loss of a loved one, somebody passes. It could be a car wreck and helping people navigate through that. It could be job loss. It could be crisis within a family breakdown, divorce, whatever it is. I would just say that one of the biggest takeaways for me at this point in my life is to recognize that sometimes the most important thing that you can do is just simply be there. Just love on people and be there to listen and to just be present. It's not like you have to have lots of answers. Most of the time, we think when somebody's in trouble, we have to come in and rescue them somehow. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I learned 11 years ago was I didn't need to do anything except to just love people. That was the biggest thing. And that's not a quick fix.
No, not at all.
Especially when somebody has been wounded deeply. It really is. Yeah, you're here now, but are you going to be here next week? Right. Are you going to be here next month?
Right.
Can I count on the fact that you will still be around? And that's one of the things that I think is kind of cool 11 years later is to recognize that the depth of my relationships with people and the level of trust that people have is largely because of just spending time together and just being for 10 or 11
it's a bit of a unique situation in my mind because you're looking for what that next step in ministry is for you and Deb and your family. Mike is still at home at this point in time, all of those things.
Yeah.
And you get this opportunity, you get approached that says, what about this church who is coming out of some dysfunction and some pain? And on the surface level, a lot of guys would have looked at that and said, well, no, because like I got things I want to do. I want to be a builder. Like most of the time, guys that step into this role, they want to build. They have a vision. They have a calling. They have something. They want to hit the ground running. Going to a place that's in crisis, you don't get to do that. So I guess my question is, why in the world did you decide, hey, Deb, Micah, get in the car, we're going to Northpointe? I mean, I know it's only an hour away from your lake house, but there's a lot of churches between here and there too, you know what I mean? So like, why Northpointe? Why a place that is in crisis that you said, this is the place God wants us to be?
Yeah, and what's funny is, in retrospect, when we got here, there actually were a number of people that said, you guys have this cottage at Crystal Lake up by Carson City. That's only an hour away. Is that why you came here? and it was not a factor in our decision really at all.
Yeah.
It was just simply a kind of a cherry on top.
Sure.
But the reason that we came really was we felt like God had prepared us to be here at that point in time.
Yeah.
That all the stuff that we had been through before, the things that we cared about were it positioned us to be in a place that Northpointe cared about the same things, and in terms of my ministry career, the things that I had gone through, I understood the organizational issues that existed at Northpointe that impacted the crisis that happened in 2012 and 2013. I had experienced that in a couple of places, so I got that. A lot of guys wouldn't have understood that at a senior level kind of position to try and help sort through that. And so we really did just have this sense that God had said, you know what, I have prepared you for this point in time, for this thing. And the takeaway for that, not to just think about Northpointe, but to think about if you're at a place that you've got a friend who's just been in a car accident, or you've got a friend whose spouse has just died, or whatever that crisis is, and you find yourself there, it's because God has put you there. And I think our immediate reaction is to say, I don't know what to do. I want to run away from that crisis.
Right.
If you're there, God has put you there, and all you need to do is just be there and see how He uses you.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you don't have to have answers. You don't have to have just the right words. You just have to be there and love on people to help them come through that crisis.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're working currently through the Romans series, right?
Yeah.
And we just talked through Romans 5 and this idea of suffering. That's there, Romans 5, 3, and 4. And, to come to a place that's gone through crisis and be able to understand it means that you've gone through some sort of suffering in the past as well, right?
Right.
Like you've got character and perseverance that have come that put you in the position. And in essence, it sounds like you've had the perspective coming in of, I can use that. I don't want to waste my pain. I want to be able to use it going forward in a specific manner. Once again, God's placing you, like you said, you come up on this place. This is because God's got you here for a reason. What are the things that you felt like happened in your past that prepared you to come to a place? Because there's a lot of guys that couldn't come in and do this, or if they did, would burn out quickly, or the church would crumble, or all those things. And now we're talking about you, celebrating you over a decade afterwards. That's a little bit of a long haul for a place that you came into that was in a crisis. So what prepared you to be able to step into that role?
I think, we've talked about it. We've talked about it internally with staff. With the podcast that we did with Trent a week ago, that we minister out of our brokenness. Yeah. We minister out of our hurt, and I think we minister most effectively out of that. That we probably don't minister particularly effectively on a big scale or on a personal scale when we think that we have the answers and we've got it all figured it out.
Sure.
So specifically relative to Northpointe, back historically, 2009, the leadership of the church had made a kind of a strategic decision to have a guy as the lead pastor who wasn't the primary speaker. He and actually he didn't speak all that often. So he was visually kind of in the background on Sundays, but he was the lead pastor. He was the chief influencer, the leader of the staff, and directionally for the church.
Yeah.
There was a teaching pastor at the same time who was up front all the time, who had the voice and the recognition.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because you're trying to allow people's giftedness to shape what they do. Organizationally, there's a problem with that because you've got the guy who has the responsibility, but not the visual contact, not the direct contact, the influence with the church. So that there are some structural issues that happen with that.
Sure.
Well, I experienced that in two different churches, that same model.
Yeah.
And in both places, there were significant issues that came out of that because of the organizational tension that happens in that. So when I came in and they described, okay, this is the way that it was like, oh yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that. And so that was part that led up to that. I think that we had been through some personal crises that really prepared us to, like Jacob wrestles with God and he walks the rest of his life with a limp.
Right.
That took us there. I think I've talked about this, but it's been a number of years ago. In August 2007, it just was a weird. It was a really weird summer for us. Summer started with our son Josiah was 12 years old, got a physical to play sports, and the doctor said, "Hey, he has a heart murmur." And we said, "No, we didn't know that." And he said, "No, probably no big deal, but let's go get him checked out." When we went and got him checked out, you had kind of the worst situation where the tech person, it lasted a really long time, and he came back and said, "Yeah, there's somebody else I want to look at the results." And then the next guy who comes in says, "I'm the head of the Pediatric Heart Institute for
a little bit of a giveaway
for Washington D.C." So this is this is not like this is not it was a big deal. So ended up finding out that Joe had a heart situation from birth that we didn't know about that really had his life in danger. That happened at the beginning of the summer. He was going to have open heart surgery that summer. Our daughter Leah got married that summer, which was a really cool thing. But Deb's sister had a heart attack and died about 5 hours before the wedding. So the day of Leah's wedding, we're at the hospital with her sister's body, and I have to tell my mother-in-law that her daughter's died.
Yeah.
And there was some stuff happening at church related to the organizational structure stuff that I just talked about that had created just a tremendous amount of tension at the church. And I was kind of in the middle of that as a senior leader trying to help make sense of that. Mm-hmm. So just that summer of 2007 was a hard summer. But God proved faithful through all that, and we had people that just kind of walked with us through those times. You minister out of your weakness because God comes in and shows himself in that. And I think all of that, there are lots of other stuff. I talked some about the fact that when we moved from Maryland to Missouri. That was in 97, and the market in D.C., the housing market in D.C. tanked, and we couldn't sell our house. We had that house for about 2.5 years. When we left Missouri and moved back to D.C., the housing market had rebounded and was twice as it had doubled in those 4 years. And so we couldn't buy because all of our equity had gone away because we couldn't sell our house.
Yeah.
During that time in D.C., when we were in Virginia, the stuff that happened in 2007, we ended up moving in 2008, moving back to Ohio, and 2008 the market tanked again, and we couldn't sell our house. We had that house actually until we moved here. That house didn't sell from 2008 until 2016.
Oh my goodness.
So we had a whole bunch of time with 2 house payments, and again, God was faithful through all of that. But just so many lessons in terms of, okay, how do you navigate crisis?
Yeah.
I think your trust has to be in God, and you've got to have people around you who love you, who say, you know what? We're with you no matter what. It's going to be okay, and they just walk with you through that process. It's just so important to have that and to be that for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's just interesting hearing, people matter. Part of this, and I'm sure you've still probably got really good relationships with people that, even though you're in distance, whether it's from time in the college or time in Ohio or time in Maryland, that you can still pick up the phone and just say, hey, I'm going through this. Or if they have something, they know there's some sort of background now that you guys can lean on one another.
Yeah, it's funny because I was never in the military.
Yeah.
But you hear about people who in their company, their platoon, whatever it is in the military, that especially not just going through the normal day-to-day stuff in the military, but going through war, that the bonds that exist when you're engaged in battle and your life's on the line, that those bonds last forever. And there really is that sense that we have people from multiple times in our life that it's a really cool thing, because all you have to do is talk on the phone, or they come to see you, you go to see them, and you pick up, even though it's been 10, 15, 20 years, and the relationship has so much strength that you just fall back into it in a way that's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's good. You need people in your life, right?
Yeah.
That's most important.
Yeah.
Even the disciples, when they went out and had their own crisis trying to start churches and doing all that, they went out in pairs.
Right.
And what was it? 3 cords not easily broken, or if one man falls, the other's there to pick him up, all those kinds of things. How do you went, and you've done this because you've moved from place to place and you have relationship from place to place. How do you get those? How do you get those kinds of relationships? What are the things that you found are critical to cultivating a relationship that is beyond surface level? I mean, things in common and all that you can get there, but how do you get to the point where you can have people in your life that are dependable and can sit with you in your pain?
I think that's a great question, and some places it is easier to develop relationships in some places than other places, which is really interesting. You hear about the East Coast. And people say, oh, people are so cold there. Really hard to develop relationships. The thing about the East Coast is that everyone is consumed with their career, and relationships are way low on the priority list.
Yeah.
But everybody is desperate for relationships. And so some of our deepest friendships are in Maryland and Virginia, and we were able to make them really quickly. Like in a period of months, you'd connect, and it was like, oh, these people, this is a deep friendship that lasts. That is harder sometimes in a place where people have lived in the same place a long time, because they've got their friends from elementary school, their friends from high school, their friends from college, their friends from their neighborhood, all in the same place, and they don't necessarily have the relational bandwidth to really open that up. I think what you've got to do is try and look for and cultivate environments where you can where you can have those kind of relationships. So like for us right now, our life group this year, 6 very disparate couples, very, very different. But we prayed a ton to say, God, who do you want in our life group this year? And I talked to each of these people that had never been in a life group before. And God has done something really cool in bringing people together that love each other deeply now. And I think you've got to look for people who are looking for relationships, and you've got to be willing to invest time. And frankly, that means sometimes when you don't want to go to life group, you go anyway. Especially if it's at your house. Sometimes when somebody says, "Hey, can you come help me?" and you're thinking, what I really want to do is just not that.
Yeah. But
you still go do it.
Right.
That time that you log with them, that you invest, you just never know what conversation's going to come up, how God's going to use that to deepen that relationship. And I do think not being afraid to have a deep level conversation, to be vulnerable and authentic, and to ask questions that allow somebody else to share.
Yeah.
And to ask without judgment, if that makes any sense. I have been a pastor minister for almost 45 years, and it just is always funny to me when people say, "Oh, you wouldn't understand," whatever their situation is.
Yeah.
And I want to say, no, I think I probably do. And I've had this conversation. I've had people that whatever you're going through, been there, done that. At some level, sometimes way messier than I really, want to admit. And, but that's the kind of thing that allows you to have a relationship. And man, I think it's such a cool thing to be on the front lines when people take next steps in their walk with Jesus. Sure. That when you see somebody's life changing, that just builds that relationship that allows you to have some people along with you that can help navigate through crisis.
Yeah. So let's do this then. Last 2 questions I'll have for you.
Okay.
One, let's say I'm in crisis right now.
Yep.
And we've talked about a bunch of different stuff here, but if I come to you right now and I say I'm in crisis, I explain my crisis to you, all of that. What's the one thing that you would say, no matter what my crisis is, no matter what's going on, this is the thing that you say, hey, you need to know this. You need to take heart in this. What is that?
Oh, to somebody who is in crisis?
I'm in crisis. Yeah, you're speaking to somebody who's in crisis.
I actually would probably flip that and say, when somebody's in crisis, they don't need knowledge.
Yep.
Their brain can't process it. And so what they need to know more than anything is that they're loved, that there's somebody that's there, that's not going to walk away, that's going to see them through this time. And that's not, you don't say that with words. It's not saying, hey, if there's anything I can do, let me know. Yeah. It is, you know what? I'm coming over and going to wash the dishes for you. I'm going to go mow your lawn. You know what? Why don't you just come over and let's watch a movie together. Yeah. Just be together, play a game of cards or whatever it is. One of the things that's, I think, interesting is when you're in crisis as a church or even as a person, you're not at a place that you're ready to think about vision, about what's next. Yeah. You're just trying to hold on for the day. But you do need someone that's there that can kind of hint to say, you know what? There's going to be some good stuff that happens. It may be weeks out. It may be months out. It may be years out. But God's going to see you through this time, and I'm going to be with you through that. And so as a leader of the church, I think that you kind of hint at vision in a time of crisis, but you're not pursuing a fresh vision. You're just help loving on people, being with them. I think that's probably what I'd say more than anything. And that's why I've said before in a message how critical it is when somebody has a funeral, when somebody has visitation, to just go and be there.
Yeah.
To just show up, because you don't know how much strength that gives to somebody who's grieving at that point in time, to just have somebody there.
That's good. He just kind of answers my second question I was going to have in there, which is, what would you tell me to tell? How could I be there for somebody else who's going in crisis? And it sounds like either way, the key is to just be there.
Yeah, I think so, and to recognize that, you know, everybody talks about work-life balance. You know, I'm working so many hours, I can't go to the funeral home. I can't take the time to do that. We make time for whatever's important. Yeah. So, you know, we always say, oh, I don't have time to go do that. But you know what? If your mom or dad died, you'd make the time to go do it. And so it really is figuring out how you flesh that out in a way that does make sense, and to recognize that there is, I think, the whole balanced life facade. Yeah, it's not real. It's not fake. It really is, over a long period of time. What are you doing to pour into your wife and to pour into your kids? And if you're doing that well consistently, you have the threshold and you have the bandwidth to be able to, when the time comes, to say, hey, we're going to go get ice cream with this person, or we're going to go do this, even though that's probably not what we had on our plan. We're going to go do that because they need us. They need to be loved, and that's something that you can do individually or together.
I like it. This is good. That's good. All right. Well, this would be our first random reflection. Starting with crisis. Any teasers on where we're going next?
You know, I've got a whole bunch of ideas. You'll have to tune in next week, which means I don't know yet.
I like it. Well, hey, we appreciate you guys watching. Leave some comments, like, share, all that good stuff. If maybe anything to add, or a request from Rick on what was random things that you'd like him to chat about, feel free to send us a message or write in the comments, and we'll see what we can do. Thanks for joining us today.